UFOs have been seen flying over U.S. military restricted airspace for decades, and the government tried to cover it up for decades. But just in the last few years, all of it has been exposed. And no, this is not some impossible conspiracy theory. This is actual congressional hearing information, publicly available information. We're going to dive into it today. This is Filibusted Live. Of course, I'm Reese Black. I'm covering what I think is one of the strangest stories of our lifetime today. And so what I'm playing right here is footage of I'm going to restart it here, footage of Navy pilots filming a UFO that they encountered back in 2004. I'm just later in this episode, I'm going to get into what was actually happening when they filmed this and that whole incident that happened in 2004, why it's significant, and be showing some more video footage as well. So let's get into this. First, I'm just going to mention that this is part 2 of a multi-part series on aliens. I'm thinking at least a 3-part series on UFOs and aliens or potential aliens. So last week I covered 3-Eye Atlas. You have a video here, and I talked about why a lead Harvard astrophysicist thinks that 3-Eye Atlas, which is going to come by it's going through our solar system. It's going to pass by the sun and the Earth on October 31st. Why he thinks that it is October 30th, excuse me. Why he thinks it's an alien spaceship coming to visit Earth, right? That's going to be happening later this month. So you can watch my description of this so-called comet or object or whatever it is. And I described how unique and strange it is by using a stuffed duck. That's what I'm doing in that video right there. But for this whole series, I was asking for people to keep these questions in mind. So these are the questions I asked last time, and I'm going to attempt to answer these questions, not today, but on our final episode, I will attempt, my final episode for this series, I'll attempt to answer these questions. The questions are, while I'm talking about these possible otherworldly activity, is all of this some kind of human deception? I know that's something that people throw out a lot. And oftentimes I see people make reference to what they call Project Blue Beam, which would be a human deception, would say, no, none of this is real. It's not actual aliens or spiritual beings. It's just human deception. All of this that we're seeing, humans are deceiving us to make us think it's something else. The other question, of course, is if it's not just a deception, are these biological aliens of some kind, like actual biological beings, or are they spiritual beings? The other one is, why are they here? What are their intentions? And of course, how should we as humans respond? So like I said, I'm not going to be diving into these today, but keep them in the back of your mind as I go through this series, and I will attempt to answer them in the last and final episode. And jumping into the subject of today, I'm talking about, like I said, I think this is one of the craziest stories that is now all out in the open for everyone to see. Absolutely fascinating. And that is the story of what I'm dubbing Project Blue Book and Lou Elizondo. I always have a hard time pronouncing his last name, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. But Project Blue Book, and I have a fact sheet here that was released in '95 by the Air Force, is a Air Force project, and it is not to be confused with Project Blue Beam. Like I said, I might try to cover Project Blue Beam in a future episode in this series. But right now we're talking about Project Blue Book. And just so everyone knows, one of my main sources for all this information is a book I'm currently reading that is called Imminent, and this was written by Lou Elizondo, and I'm going to get into his history and who he is. So here's a picture of him right here. So he is the former head of the Department of Defense's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, the AATIP for short. And so he joined the AATIP back in 2008. And this was after 10 years in the military, doing military intelligence specifically. So he had a 10-year career. Then he joins the AATIP, thinking initially that he was getting recruited in just a new kind of intelligence agency that was going to be similar to stuff he'd been doing before. And it turned out, no, in fact, it's his literal job at the AATIP was studying UFOs. That was what his job was, actual UFOs. And that was his job, was what are UFOs? You basically study it, figure it out, see what the reports and things that are happening here in the military. And so he did that for 10 years. I'm going to get into a little bit of that. And of course, they no longer call them UFOs. Now they call them UAPs, which means unusual anomalous phenomena. And there's a reason they stopped calling them UFOs, which I will get into. So I will be referring to them as UFOs, UAPs, basically a flying object, usually a round flying object that are seen by pilots that people don't know what they are. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So he joins the AATIP in 2008, and then he quits about 10 years later in 2017, and he quits to become one of the most famous whistleblowers in history. And he is a whistleblower for what that agency was doing and what they uncovered about UFOs and all of many things that the government knows about UFOs, and he starts whistleblowing and spreading this information. Why did he do that? Why did he feel like he had to quit and share this information with the public? Well, all of this is, I would say, summarized quite nicely in the foreword to this book by a guy named Chris Mellon, who is also a former Department of Defense intelligence agent. And he gets into this crazy story, which I'm going to outline here, of why the government was purposely covering up reports of UFOs, evidence of UFOs. And it all begins with this Project Blue Book. So Project Blue Book, what happened was during the 40s, UFOs began to be a massive phenomena. It kind of started to people who were seeing them, and both civilians and military, and then it peaked kind of the public's interest, I think, in like a massive way. And then, of course, that's from the 40s and in the 50s as well. You start to get the whole like flying saucer idea and like little aliens, like little gray men or little green men and that kind of thing. So all that's starting to kind of unfold. And so the Air Force pilots are reporting these things. And so they're like, all right, we're going to have to look into this. So they start Project Blue Book. And supposedly it was supposed to originally have been a serious study into UFOs to determine what they are, and not with a preconceived notion of like, we know what they are, now we're going to go study them. Like literally, these keep getting reported. We need to study it. Let's go study it. So it was supposed to be a serious, unbiased reporting mechanism and investigative mechanism. And that went from 47 to 69. And their stated purpose was learning about the UFOs, and they investigated over 12,000 reported incidents. And they have a final conclusion here, which I will read. Three final conclusions. Number one, no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever an indication of threat to was ever an indication of threat to our national security. So that's the first thing he said. These were never a threat to our national security. Number two, there was no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as, quote, unidentified represented technological developments or principles, beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge. So they're saying these things are not beyond what we currently have as far as science goes. And number three is there was no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified were extraterrestrial vehicles. So straight up, definitely not aliens, right? That's the three things that they say. However, as I said, that's their final conclusion, and that was supposed to be their stated reason. Their actual purpose, according to Chris and according to other whistleblowers and that sort of thing, is because their actual purpose was, it might have started out as an unbiased study, but it quickly became part of the government's campaign to discredit all UFO sightings, to discredit them, to make people that were associated with UFO sightings seem crazy and silly, to manipulate the public and also the military personnel, to gaslight them and manipulate them to no longer talk about or even report UFOs and things, especially for pilots, things that they saw. And where do we get this information from? Well, this begins with a now declassified meeting, a CIA secret meeting that occurred in 1953. So soon after this Project Blue Book got started, they started looking into UFOs. And this 1953 meeting, it's called the Robertson's Panel. You can look it up. It's declassified now. From this declassified meeting, they formulated a policy, the CIA did, to discourage people from reporting UFOs. And they wanted the military and the public to, like I said before, begin disregarding any talk of UFOs as something just silly and non-serious. And their stated reason, they have a reason for this. Their stated reason for discrediting all talk of UFOs is they feared that the US air defense communications would become overwhelmed by constant UFO reports. So basically, if they allowed what was happening to continue to happen, they thought that it was going to become so prevalent that pilots were going to be calling in and reporting, we're going to be picking these things up on radar or whatever, just whatever they thought was going to be happening, that if we allowed this to go on unchecked, then we were going to be overwhelmed with a constant influx of UFO sightings, UFO reports. And they didn't want that to happen, I guess, because if it becomes overwhelmed, that's a threat to national security. We can't now pay attention to more important things like, Russia maybe invading us, or nukes, or, that kind of things. Like, we need to be on guard for these other things. And so that's their stated reason. And I'm just going to say right now, I don't find the stated reason to be very convincing. I think it's kind of insane. It's like saying we know it's happening, but we don't think it's, even though we don't know what it is and we don't have an explanation for it, we don't think it's unsafe. Like, these floating objects haven't done anything bad to us yet. So because they haven't done anything bad to us yet, we're going to ignore it. We're going to completely ignore it so we can focus on more important things. And that doesn't really sound like something that the CIA or the government would actually do. Like, they would just straight up say, we're going to ignore it. We're not going to look into it. So much so that we want to gaslight anybody into eventually giving up and saying, all right, fine, I'm going to stop reporting these things. But that is their stated reason. So the hypothesized reasons, why did they actually start doing this? Why did they actually start this campaign? And to, again, try to create a culture where the UFOs were not going to be seen as a serious thing. There's three main reasons that are usually given. And again, none of this is official or declassified. This is just from people that have looked into this way more than I have. And this is these are the conclusions that they usually come to. One of three, or a mix of all three together, is one: the government wanted to stop a public mass panic. So they were afraid that the UFO situation was going to get so out of hand that the public was going to be like, oh my gosh, we're literally being invaded by aliens, and completely freak out, and they would lose control. And so they didn't want that to happen. And so they decided to do, all right, we're going to do this campaign to stop people from talking about it. The second reason would be because, which goes into this third reason, is they wanted to keep it secret from enemies. So they didn't want Russia specifically, or maybe other enemies or other countries, to know that they were seeing UFOs over their military installations here in the United States. And so they're like, all right, we are going to pretend this is not happening, and we're going to make this study and all these things, investigate, and we're going to investigate it and then prove, no, we're debunked it, it's not happening. So that way other countries don't become wise and realize that this is occurring. So we're trying to hide it from other countries, essentially. So the first one, we're either trying to hide it from the public, or we're trying to hide it from other countries. Could be both, obviously. And then the last reason is because they wanted to secretly acquire UFO technology in order to reverse engineer it. And that sounds like a pretty outrageous claim to me. Like, it sounds crazy. But this is something that a lot of people think is possible, that, they look into this and try to figure out, why is the government hiding this kind of stuff? Why have they hid it before? This is something that people have claimed. I don't know. I don't have any way to prove that that is true. But I am putting that forth as possible reasons, because, again, the reason stated by the CIA from that meeting just sounds so unlikely, that they literally are just like, we don't want to get too many UFO reports, so we're going to gaslight everybody into thinking that there are no UFOs, that no, these pilots aren't seeing anything real, and then we're just not going to look into what it is. It sounds really crazy to me that that would be their actual stance, but that was their stance. That was at least their outward facing stance, and the campaign that was started inside the government to squelch and to push down and suppress any talk of UFOs. So I'm going to get into more of what that campaign actually looked like, and how it affected us from the 50s to the 70s, and then get into what that means for us today, now that we have whistleblowers. But first, let's hear a word from our sponsor.
Investing can be confusing and scary, but it doesn't have to be. Genesis Gold Group takes the guessing out of the game and guides you on your gold investment journey. We at Filibusted love the genius design of the Prepper Bar, which breaks up into sections, kind of like a chocolate bar. But if you prefer high security insured gold storage, they have that too. And unlike Fort Knox, the gold is actually there, 100% owned by you. So don't wait to get started. Visit filibustedgold.com today for a free investment guide from Genesis Gold Group.
All right. Thank you, Genesis Gold Group, for sponsoring this video. So what did the rest of this campaign look like? So there was several things that was part of this government campaign from the 50s to the 70s, but here's a few of things that happened. So one of them was the Air Force funded university studies to look into UFOs. The problem was the university studies told the Air Force what the Air Force wanted to hear, right? As it often happens when you when you have that kind of like, I'm paying you to tell me this thing, and that ends up what's happening, right? And so the scientists, of course, that were paid to look into this, they ended up recommending something that fit perfectly with the government's campaign to squelch this whole UFO talk, which was that the scientists came back and found that's not creditable at all. In fact, no scientists, they recommended, these scientists that they paid recommended that no scientists who waste their time looking into UFOs should ever be promoted. So right there, they just got academia off their back. They got all scientists off their back, because now if scientists talk about it, they know that they're under threat of not being promoted, like in a university. They got that little bit of the gaslighting culture now into the academia. Now, it was obviously easier to do that probably for the academia, because they're not seeing the things. They're not the pilots that are like actually seeing things when they're flying around. But regardless, that started to get there. And of course, academia affects all of eventually the media, and eventually, public perception. So scientists are saying, no, this is a hoax. Then obviously you're not going to listen to somebody who's looking into it and talking about it. And then the final official word from the Air Force when they closed Project Blue Book, that I have the fact sheet on here. This was in 1970 where they finally closed it. And they said, this is, of course, despite thousands of credible and unexplained reports of UFO sightings, thousands that were reported to them. They said, quote, all UFO sightings, quote, are a mild form of hysteria, individuals who fabricate reports to perpetrate a hoax or seek publicity, psychological persons, and misidentification of natural objects. So that was the Air Force's official stance in 1970. So basically, if you are a pilot who sees one of these things and says something about it, the Air Force is saying to you, you're either crazy, or you're a liar, or you're a fool. And so unsurprisingly, this did not encourage any pilots to report these kinds of things, because that was the official stance of the Air Force. You're crazy. This is a mild form of hysteria, or you're just lying and trying to profit from sharing a hoax. And so that really repressed and created a culture. What it did was it created a culture of suppressing UAP reports in the military. So the pilots were less likely to report. Also, even the reports that were filed were not shared across different branches of the military. So you have one branch of the military that's seeing some weird stuff, and they might keep some of their records on it, but they don't share it with the rest of the branches of the military. There's not the cross talk, right? So there isn't like a growing consensus of what these things are. It's still just little siloed, each branch kind of doing their own thing, and they're not communicating, and it's not going to the highest levels that oversees all the branches, because they purposely made it to where there wouldn't be an appetite. They purposely created the culture where people would be less comfortable talking about it. So that was, of course, the official stance from 1970. As far as we know, there wasn't more official stances given to suppress it since 1970, but that culture has continued. And the culture continued all the way through the 2000s, through the 2010s, and it only started to change literally in 2017 is when that culture began to change. So 2008, 2017, that's when Lou was in his position, looking at UFOs and looking at them, the evidence of them, and talking to pilots and learning about them. And he learned during that time that UAPs were being spotted by pilots all the time. That this wasn't just a random, like every once in a while thing. This was happening literally all the time. UAPs specifically sighted in restricted airspace over military installations or just in restricted airspace, sometimes on a weekly basis. There would be reports of people seeing these things. And one Air Force base or one air base actually posted warnings of potential mid-air collisions because they were seeing these things so often that they started warning their pilots about possibly crashing into one, even though there was not supposed to be officially, there was nothing in the air there. It was a restricted airspace. There was nothing there. And yet they still felt the need to warn their pilots because it just seemed so dangerous because they were seeing things move above that area so often. And these were reports from highly trained pilots, even officers and officers in the military. And I think this book and other people as well make the point that these are really credible witnesses because they have nothing to gain, especially early on. And in the 2000s, the reports that start coming out in like the 2000s and the 2004 instance, which I'm going to get into, the reason they're credible is because of the military culture where it's still unofficially discouraged any serious investigation into UAPs. And so they have nothing to gain from this. They could lose out on promotions and be considered to be crazy or having mild hysteria, as they said in the 70s, by talking about it too much. And so those who did talk about these things that can't be explained, they are credible in that sense. And there's so many people that have come out, and the whistleblowers and the people that have talked about seeing these kinds of things, and they're not crazy people. They're like really talented, highly trained pilots, that are doing super serious work in the world. And they're like, yeah, I saw this thing, and no one's ever had an explanation for it. And so that's why the witnesses are somewhat credible in that sense, right? It's not like they're in a culture where they would be patted on the back for like, oh yeah, I saw a UFO, and everybody like, oh great. Honestly, they're putting themselves at risk, especially putting themselves hurting their chances of being promoted by talking about this stuff too much. So long story short, Lou becomes convinced that UAPs are real, right? And he becomes convinced they could be a serious threat, and that the government is not treating it like a serious threat. The government's not treating it seriously at all. And because they've had this leftover culture that is belittling it and discrediting it. And so one thing he became convinced of was that these UAP activity is happening concentrated around military installations. And he wanted to know why. Why is this happening? Why would there be a concentration around military installations unless something was trying to spy on the military? And if it was, then who wants to know what the U.S. military is capable of? That they would have these UAP things, aircraft, hovering around in restricted airspace or close to military installations. The other thing he became convinced of was that what he had seen from the video footage and talking to pilots was that this was could not be explained by any known human technology, meaning that it could not be Russia and it could not be China because they don't have the technology to do what these UAPs were doing and the maneuvering that they were doing. And it's Lou's claim that he could not get the Department of Defense to take the threat seriously. And he found himself fighting that culture that I was talking about, and that the top leadership had no appetite to shine a serious light into these things. And also, he found, of course, that most people in the military and in the scientific community and also the media considered UFOs to be completely ridiculous. And so he said, I can't fight the blob inside the blob. And of course, I'm speaking from what he has self-reported about this. And so he decided, since his job was to get to the bottom of UAPs, since he could not do his job in the military, he was going to have to do it from the outside. So he quit to become a whistleblower to pressure the government from the outside to take this more seriously by bringing it to the public. And that gets us to the very first breaking story of what Lou began to share with the world. And this came out in 2017 after he left the AATIP. And this is a December 2017 news article titled "On the Trail of a Secret Pentagon UFO Program." And it details a lot of the stuff that I've talked about here. And it also details that incident in 2004, which I showed video footage of, which is showing right here. I'm going to get into that here in a little bit. But there were a lot of, so that's the end of Lou's story. So for the sake of this episode, but there was direct results of this that takes us from the 1952 CIA meeting that says, all right, we are going to suppress UFO talk. We're not going to have, this is not going to be treated seriously. We're going to make sure the military and the public never treats this seriously and never actually looks into this, to the crazy things that have happened in just the last few years directly related to Lou coming out. And this article was one of the very beginning steps of that. So it's worth showing here on the screen. So direct results we get in May 2022, we had the first congressional hearing on UFO sightings. And this is with top military officials talking to Congress publicly, filmed publicly. You can go watch it. Talking to Congress about UFOs. And this was the first public hearing on UFOs in over 50 years. So massive change right there. That broke it open. I don't remember the 2002 one very much, but I do remember when the 2023 one happened, because when that one happened, that was the one that just made everybody start saying, oh my gosh, the government just admitted that aliens are real. They just admitted it. Like, this is crazy. So this was, of course, as this article is titled, "Did the government confirm aliens exist? Here's what happened." This is from the July 2023 congressional hearing. And the one of the main whistleblowers who spoke at this one and spoke to Congress is a guy who's ex-Air Force. His name's David Grush. That's how you pronounce his name. David Grush. And so he had some crazy claims, absolutely crazy claims. Here's a picture of him. But to quickly get through this congressional hearing here, here's some of the things that he claimed. He claimed that the government knows about UFOs and aliens, and the government has secrets that it does not share with Congress. He's telling members of Congress that, saying, yes, the government actually is operating above congressional oversight when it comes to UFOs and aliens and these kinds of things. They're not telling you guys. He's told this to Congress, and he's a Air Force veteran telling this to Congress. He also claimed that the government had recovered several vehicles, which fits into that possible what do they call it? Reverse engineering theory that I talked about earlier, that the government had recovered several vehicles. This is his claim. And that inside of some of the vehicles were actual dead, non-human pilots, or biologicals, as I think he referred to them as. There's biologicals in the vehicles that they recovered. Absolutely sensational claims. Less sensational claims made at this congressional hearing. This was by a former Navy pilot, Ryan Graves. He stated what I think sounds like super grounded and makes so much sense that, yes, obviously this is something that needs to be taken seriously. I'm just going to read his quote because I thought it was so cool. He says, "If everyone could see the sensor and video data I witnessed, our national conversation would change." Again, he's telling this to members of Congress. And he says, "I urge us to put aside stigma and address the security and safety issue this topic represents. If UAP are foreign drones, it is an urgent national security problem." Obviously, if these were from Russia or China or a different country, it would be a security issue because they're flying through restricted airspace all the time and we're not doing anything about it. And then he says, if it is something else, it is an issue for science. In either case, unidentified objects are a concern for flight safety. And I get his point there because, again, you have that Air Force base or that air base saying that we're warning people, don't collide with these things because we saw them so often, which is a crazy, crazy thing. So more whistleblowers, of course, have come out besides just like the couple individuals I've talked about here. There's been claims by like former CIA agents that, of alien activity, different kinds of alien activity, all kinds of people, have claimed to have inside knowledge. But I brought up these people because they seem to be the most reputable and credible as far as what they were doing while they were in the government, like Lou, and also people that were invited to come speak to Congress about this. Lastly, this is just part of like the fallout. Before I get into that 2004 instance, which I want to, because that 2004 instance is like peak highlight of like what are the things that people have been seeing in the skies. This is one of the last things that came from Lou and the whistleblowers and all this stuff. And let's just think of the change here from 1953 to what we're seeing today. So this is from November 2024. I'm just going to read a few paragraphs of this article. It's titled, "After Decades of Denial, the Pentagon finally admits it's baffled by UFOs." So just a few paragraphs here. "After nearly 8 decades of official denial and obfuscation of the UFO phenomenon, the new head of the Pentagon's UFO analysis office made a remarkable admission last month. This is November 2024. During a briefing with reporters, so he's talking to reporters, John Koslowski, I don't know how to say his name, director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, admitted that the U.S. government is stumped by several, quote, true anomalies. According to Koslowski, quote, there are interesting UFO cases that I, with my physics and engineering background and time in the intelligence community, do not understand. And I don't know anybody else who understands them either. This is a top Pentagon official saying he doesn't know anybody in the military that understands some of these things that they've seen. And he says, critically, the Department of Defense and intelligence agencies are so perplexed by some UFO incidents that, per Koslowski, quote, we're going to need the help of academia and the public to address some of these issues. I just wanted to highlight that because it's the exact 180 shift from the 1953 plan of we are going to pressure academia to say, we're going to pay academia to start putting out studies to say, no, anybody who talks about this is crazy. They shouldn't be considered for a position at a university. And then we're going to, of course, let that trickle down to the public. Maybe there was other things that they were doing to gaslight the public. I don't know. I don't know all the ins and outs of this. And so you have that. And today, 2024, we have a top Pentagon official asking the academia, asking scientists and the public for help. Like, we don't know what these UFOs are. Maybe y'all can help us. And that's the pivot there is crazy. Finishing this off, says these admissions are a welcome and long overdue shift in the official tone of the UFO phenomenon. After decades of dismissive, nothing to see here statements from the Pentagon, the sudden pivot to officials being so stumped by some incidents that they need the public's help is striking. At the same time, given the long history of highly credible, consistent, multi-witness reports of objects exhibiting extreme performance characteristics, this shift is not surprising. So let's get into one of those reports of, what did that say? Extreme performance characteristics. So this is one from 2004. It's probably the most famous UFO incident now. As I was looking around the internet and seeing, I was like, oh yeah, this is the picture and the video footage that people show all the time, because the video footage is quite astounding. I'm going to play a little bit more here in a second. But this is called the 2004 Nimitz incident, if I'm saying that correctly. And it was a UAP sighting by multiple Navy pilots and picked up on radar and recorded by lots of instruments. And this was by the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, which is a picture. This is a picture of the actual. That's the Nimitz carrier right there, and that's part of the aircraft strike group. And when this incident occurred, I believe they had another ship as well, a smaller ship than just the aircraft carrier. And this incident became famous for several reasons, but one of which is because they caught some of it on film, and that has eventually been declassified for us. So I'm going to play a little bit of that now. And this is, I've seen some of the people talking and explaining this before, and the camera kind of changes from like infrared to like video. And so that's why like the color kind of changes after a few times. But let's talk about what happened. So this was a Navy ship that detected a large number of UAPs, over 100 in a week's time. When I looked into this, I was astounded because I'd heard about like, pilots saw a UFO, but I didn't know the full story. So in a week's time, they saw out in the ocean, they saw over 100 of these things, and they called them anomalous aerial vehicles, which again goes back to they're trying to avoid the term UFOs because of the derision of that term, right? And so even people in the military, even in 2004, they won't say the word UFOs. They have to come up with other words to describe it because of that push derision. So they saw these UFOs descending from low Earth orbit. So that means that the objects would appear 80,000 feet in the sky, which is way higher than aircrafts usually fly. And then suddenly they would drop at an incredible speed, and they would drop all the way down to 20,000 feet. I'm just going to play this back again. And then they would zoom away. So they start up low Earth orbit, drop down to 20,000 feet, and then they would zoom away. And they were seeing these, for several days. And there was a commander who's one of the pilots there who really wanted to like intercept them and like go see what these things are. So they finally did. And so 2 Navy jets actually were able to get close enough to one that the people in the jets saw the object with their own eyes. So there were 6 naval aviators. They saw it with their naked eyes, and they described it as a wingless, noiseless, white egg-shaped aircraft. So it doesn't have wings. It's not making any noise. It's white, shaped like an egg, and it's moving around in unexplainable ways. Like I said, one of those 6 naval aviators was a commander, and he said it was vastly more capable than any aircraft he had ever seen. And he, quote, not from this world. That's how he described this aircraft that he saw. And so to real quick tell the story, the commander is in his, they go out, the 2 jets go out to try to spot it, try to get close to it. And he claims that he saw a disturbance in the water. He didn't see the UFO at first. He saw something in the water, and it was like waves were splashing over some kind of object that he couldn't really see in the water. And then the next thing he saw was he saw the UFO flying 50 feet above the water. I presume that means that it came out of the water. That's what it sounds like from his description. So he sees it flying 50 feet above the water. And then all the pilots watched it ping pong around in different, that was their description, was like if a ping pong hits a wall and bounces in a different direction, they watch it just ping pong around, sudden shifts and changes, zipping around. And then suddenly it flew right at his plane, crossed the nose of his jet, and was gone. And after that, they didn't see it anymore. And this was recorded by multiple radars, sensor platforms, and also video. And they have video of it as well. I showed the video earlier, a couple videos of this, what people have described either an egg-shaped or a tic-tac-shaped, object flying around here. And they said that it did things considered impossible for any aircraft to do. It was maneuvering at such high speeds and changing direction so suddenly that this was the pilot's description, is that the forces that would be sustained by this UFO aircraft would be so strong it would destroy any known jet or missile. So there's no known jet or missile that could have done the maneuvering that it did without sustaining such great forces that it would have been absolutely destroyed. And there is still no explanation for what they saw that day. So I'm all about finished. I just wanted to break down one of the instances of seeing this. And of course, the question that I'm leaving now, and the question that I'm going to try to get into next week is, are there any explanations for these UAPs that have presumably been stumping the military, at least most sections of the military, for decades? Maybe they're secretly, as that one whistleblower was claiming, maybe there secretly is a part of some part of the government that knows more about this than the rest, and they're just not sharing it. But these have stumped pilots. These have stumped commanders. These have stumped intelligence agents, apparently, for decades, and have not been given a good enough explanation for what they are, or why they're here, or why we're seeing them. So next week, I will do my best to try to cover that. I know that's a huge topic, but I'm going to keep trying to cover it. So tune in next Monday. And until then, of course, you can go to our YouTube page and you can go to the playlists section. I'm going to add a playlist for this series on UFOs, UAPs, aliens, whatever I'm going to call it. So that'll be there. So you can see all of the videos from this series, however long the series is going to be. So thanks so much for watching. That's all I have for now. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week.
Gold is not just a backup plan if the world falls apart. It's an investment opportunity that could set you up for generations. There's never really a bad time to invest in gold, but you want to make sure you have the right guide. And that is where Genesis Gold Group shines. Whether you are a first-time buyer or a seasoned investor, their trusted expertise and competitive pricing makes them an easy choice. They offer tangible assets in case of emergencies, but they can also design the perfect IRA just for you. And they'll even cut through all that confusing red tape from the IRS. We at Filibusted love the genius design of the Prepper Bar, which breaks up into sections like a chocolate bar. But if you prefer a more high-security insured gold storage, they have that too. And unlike Fort Knox, the gold is actually there and 100% owned by you. Genesis Gold Group is a safe, simple, and convenient way to invest. Visit filibustedgold.com today for your free investment guide from Genesis Gold Group.